The coffee in Captain Jake Morrison's mug was still steaming when the world changed forever. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night that should have been like any other, but the universe had different plans. Jake had been pulling another late shift. At NORAD's Cheyenne Mountain Complex, buried deep beneath Colorado's granite peaks, when the impossible happened. "Sir, we have multiple bogies holding position at 22,000 miles. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez's voice cut through the quiet hum of the command center like a knife through silk. But there was something different about her tone, a tremor that made Jake's spine straighten instinctively. Amy was a 10-year veteran who'd tracked everything from Russian bombers to space debris without batting an eye. Nothing rattled her. Nothing, until tonight. They're massive, sir. Each one is the size of Manhattan." Her voice cracked with barely contained terror as she stared at her radar screen. Her face pale as moonlight. Jake's blood turned to ice water as he rushed to her station. The coffee mug slipped from his fingers, shattering against the floor in a spray of ceramic and dark liquid, though he barely noticed. His eyes were locked on the radar display, where 17 dark blips hung in perfect formation above Earth, like vultures circling a dying animal. Think about it for a moment. What would you do if you were looking at proof that humanity wasn't alone? That we'd been living in cosmic ignorance while something far more advanced watched us from the darkness. The ships weren't moving. They weren't scanning. Weren't communicating. They were just there, waiting. And that terrified Jake more than any aggressive action could have. "Run diagnostics," he ordered, his military training kicking in even as his mind reeled. "Triple-check everything. Satellite feeds, radar calibration, atmospheric interference already done." Sir Amy interrupted, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "I've run every test in the book. These aren't meteors, space junk, or equipment malfunctions. They're artificial constructs, and they're big enough to block out the sun." The math was horrifying. 17 ships, each roughly 5 kilometers in length, positioned in Earth's orbit with mathematical precision. Jake's mind raced through the implications. If these were hostile, Earth's entire military arsenal would be about as effective as throwing rocks at a hurricane. Within minutes, his secure phone erupted like a volcano. The red phone, the one that connected directly to the Pentagon, Kremlin, and Beijing's Ministry of Defense, screamed with incoming calls. Every major power on Earth was seeing the same impossible sight, and they were all asking the same terrifying question. What the hell are those things? "Morrison here." Jake answered the first call, his voice steadier than he felt. "Captain, this is General Patricia Walsh from the Joint Chiefs. Tell me you have an explanation for what's sitting above our heads." Jake looked at the radar display again, hoping against hope that the ships would be gone, that this was all some elaborate nightmare. But the 17 blips remained, as solid and real as the fear crawling up his throat. "No explanation, General." They appeared simultaneously across all tracking stations. No approach vectors, no engine signatures, no communications. Just there. The silence on the other end of the line stretched like a taut wire. When General Walsh spoke again, her voice carried the weight of a decision that would reshape human history. Execute media blackout protocol immediately. Every satellite feed, every amateur radio operator, every social media post, nothing gets out. As of right now, this never happened. Jake's hands trembled as he signed the most classified document in human history. The Emergency Media Control Order, a piece of legislation so secret that most congressmen didn't know it existed. With his signature, every news outlet, every internet provider, every communication system in the free world would receive the same message. Total information. Lockdown. But here's the thing about secrets. They have a way of eating you alive from the inside out. And Jake Morrison was about to discover that some truths are too big to contain as he watched his team scramble to implement the blackout. Jake realized they were crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. In the span of 30 minutes, the governments of Earth had made a collective decision to lie to 7 billion people about the most important event in human history. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here was humanity's first contact with an alien civilization, and the first human response was deception. What did that say about the species they were trying to protect? Sir Amy called out, her voice barely above a whisper. The ships, there, moving into a different formation. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs as he watched the 17 blips shift positions with surgical precision. They weren't random movements. There was intelligence behind them, a pattern that suggested. These visitors understood exactly what was happening on the surface below. They knew about the blackout. They knew about the lies. And they were waiting to see what humanity would do next. The weight of that realization settled on Jake's shoulders like a mountain. Humanity's childhood had just ended, and nobody could ever know. But how long could such a massive secret survive? How long before someone looked up at the night sky and noticed that the stars weren't quite where they should be? Deep down, Jake knew the truth that would haunt him for the next 200 days. This was just the beginning. And if you think keeping secrets from your family is hard, try keeping the biggest secret in human history from the entire world. Want to know what happens when secrets compound over time? Yes. Check out our video about the power of compounding, because sometimes the smallest decisions create the biggest consequences. 3 months of lies had turned Jake Morrison into a ghost of himself. The man who used to crack jokes during briefings and sleep like a baby after 18-hour shifts was gone, replaced by someone who jumped at shadows and saw alien ships in his morning coffee. Every dawn brought the same ritual of horror. Jake would climb the stairs to the observatory level of the Cheyenne Mountain Complex, past guards who nodded respectfully but couldn't hide the worry in their eyes. Everyone knew the captain was breaking down, but nobody dared ask why. The classified telescopes waited for him like old friends' friends that showed him nightmares instead of stars. 17 ships. Always 17. Hanging in Earth's orbit like sleeping demons, each one massive enough to block out the sun over entire cities. Jake had done the math so many times he could recite it in his sleep if he actually slept anymore. Each vessel, stretched roughly 5 kilometers from bow to stern, their dark holes absorbing light like cosmic black holes. One ship could obliterate New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago combined. 17 could end civilization before lunch and the world. Below, they went about their lives like nothing had changed. People complained about traffic, argued about politics, worried about their mortgages. Meanwhile, Jake Morrison carried the weight of humanity's darkest secret on shoulders that felt ready to snap. "Morning, Captain," Dr. Lisa Thompson's voice made him jump. Again, everything made him jump these days. Lisa was the lead xenobiologist who'd been studying the ships since day one. A brilliant woman who'd traded her promising career at MIT for a front row seat to humanity's potential extinction. Her eyes were bloodshot from months of sleepless nights, dark circles making her look like she'd been punched by insomnia itself. "They're not moving, sir," she reported, pulling up data on her tablet. It's the same words she'd spoken every morning for 93 days. No energy signatures, no communications, nothing. It's like they're waiting. Jake's patience already, worn thinner than tissue paper, finally snapped. "Waiting for what?" he snarled, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Waiting for us to roll over and die? Waiting for the perfect moment to turn us into cosmic dust?" The stress was killing him literally. His doctor had prescribed enough anxiety medication to tranquilize a horse, but pills couldn't silence the nightmares. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those ships opening fire, saw cities burning, saw the sky itself bleeding. The panic. Attacks hit him at random moments during briefings, in the shower, while eating dinner that tasted like cardboard in fear. But here's what really kept him awake at night: the waiting. If these aliens wanted to destroy Earth, why hadn't they done it already? 3 months was an eternity in military time. You could conquer a planet in 3 months. You could end a species in 3 months. So why were they just ... watching?
Doctor.
Thompson pulled up a holographic display that filled the small observation room with points of light. Each point represented one of the alien ships, their positions mapped with mathematical precision. "The formation isn't random, Captain. I've been analyzing their positioning for weeks, and there's a pattern." Jake squinted at the display, his sleep-deprived brain struggling to process the information. "What kind of pattern?" "They're arranged in prime numbers 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. 17. A universal mathematical constant that any intelligent species would recognize. Lisa's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. It's like they're leaving us a calling card. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. His stomach dropped into his boots as the pieces clicked together. They're trying to communicate. Out. Sir, Dr. Thompson said, her words hanging in the air like a death sentence. They're testing us, testing to see if we're smart enough to figure it out. Think about that for a moment. You're being tested by beings so advanced they can park 17 city-sized ships in Earth's orbit without breaking a sweat. The test isn't about your weapons or your military might, it's about your intelligence. Your ability to recognize patterns, your capacity to understand that the universe operates on mathematical principles that transcend species and planets. Jake felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in his throat. So let me get this straight. We've got 17 alien ships hanging over our heads like the sword of Damocles, and they're playing cosmic Sudoku with us. It's not a game, Captain, Lisa said sharply. This is first contact, and our response or lack thereof is being evaluated. The weight of that realization pressed down on Jake like a physical force. For 3 months, world governments had focused on hiding the truth, maintaining the lie, keeping the secret. But what if the secret was the problem? What if the aliens weren't waiting for humanity to surrender or fight back? What if they were waiting for humanity to acknowledge their presence? How long do we have? Jake asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Unknown. But Captain, there's something else. Lisa's hands trembled as she adjusted the holographic display. The ships had been making micro-adjustments to their positions, tiny changes that most people would miss. But if you track the pattern over time, the display shifted, showing the ship's movements over the past 3 months. Jake watched in fascination and growing horror as the vessels gradually tightened their formation. Like a noose slowly closing around Earth's neck, they're running. Out of patience, he whispered. Or we're running out of time, Lisa corrected. Either way, this waiting game can't last forever. Jake stared at the display, his mind racing through possibilities. Every option led to the same terrifying conclusion. Humanity was being judged, and the verdict was still pending. The aliens had the power to destroy Earth, but they were choosing to wait. The question was, what were they waiting for? As he watched the 17 points of light hover above a sleeping world, Jake realized that humanity's greatest test wasn't military or technological. It was moral. Could the species that had split the atom and walked on the moon find the courage to tell the truth? Could they unify in the face of the unknown? Or would they fragment into fear and chaos? The answer would determine whether humanity joined the cosmic community or became another cautionary tale written in the stars. And just like the power of compounding, every day of silence was adding weight to the eventual reckoning. Speaking of compounding effects, check out our next video about how small decisions create massive consequences over time, because sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest choices. On day 127, Jake Morrison was eating a tasteless sandwich in the NORAD cafeteria when the aliens finally made their move, and it terrified him more than their silence ever had. The alarm that shattered the morning quiet wasn't the usual drill tone. This was the sound that military personnel pray they'll never hear the klaxon. That means the world is about to change forever. Jake's sandwich hit the floor as he sprinted toward the command center, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged animal desperate to escape. Captain, Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez's voice cut through the chaos of the command center like a scream in a library. The largest ship, it's moving. Jake's blood turned to liquid nitrogen as he stared at the main display. For 127 days, the 17 alien vessels had remained as motionless as tombstones in a graveyard. Now, the flagship of Behemoth, that dwarfed the others, was descending through Earth's atmosphere like a black dagger cutting through blue silk. All stations, DEFCON 1. Jake roared into his headset. This is not a drill. Pete, this is not a drill. Within minutes, every military installation on the planet was screaming the same message into secure channels. Nuclear submarines surfaced in the Pacific. Fighter jets scrambled from bases across 6 continents. Missile silos opened their steel mouths to taste the sky. But deep down, Everyone knew the truth. If these aliens wanted to destroy Earth, humanity's entire arsenal would be about as effective as throwing pebbles at a hurricane. The ship descended. With terrifying precision, its massive hull blotting out the sun for anyone unlucky enough to be directly beneath it. Jake watched the radar readings with growing dread as the vessel stopped exactly 200 kilometers above the Pacific Ocean, hanging. They're like a cosmic sword of Damocles. "Sir, it's releasing something," Lieutenant Rodriguez shouted, her voice cracking with barely contained panic. Jake's stomach dropped as he watched a small object detach from the ship's hull. On the screens, it looked insignificant, a tiny speck, falling from something the size of Manhattan. But as tracking systems locked onto it, the object's true nature became clear. It was artificial, geometric, and pulsing with an eerie blue light that seemed to cut through the ocean's darkness like a laser. "Get me a recovery team," Jake ordered, his mind racing through protocols that had never been designed for this scenario. "Full deep-sea capability. Whatever that thing is, we need it now." Think about it for a moment. After 127 days of silence, the aliens had finally sent humanity a message. But instead of radio waves or laser communications, they dropped something into the deepest part of Earth's oceans. Were they testing humanity's technological capabilities? Or was this something else entirely? Within hours, the USS Leviathan was racing toward the drop site, its hull cutting through Pacific swells like a knife through butter. Aboard the submarine, Commander Tom Bradley, a veteran deep-sea pilot who'd seen more of Earth's ocean floor than most people had seen of their own backyards, was preparing for the dive of his life. 3 miles down and descending, Bradley's voice crackled through the radio, distorted by the crushing depths of the Mariana Trench. Visual contact with the object. "It's Jesus Christ. It's beautiful." Jake leaned closer to the radio, his knuckles white as he gripped the handset. "Describe what you're seeing, Tom." "It's crystalline, perfectly geometric. It's about the size of a basketball, but it's not like any crystal I've ever seen. The light, it's pulsing in patterns like a heartbeat. And Captain, I swear it's getting brighter as I approach." The next few minutes felt like hours. Jake could hear the hum of the submersible's motors, the whisper of Bradley's breathing, the distant creaking of metal under impossible pressure. Every person in the command center held their breath, waiting for humanity's first direct contact with alien technology. "I've got it," Bradley finally announced, his voice tight with concentration. "Robotic arm is making contact, some kind of crystal pulsing with blue light. When I touch it, the transmission cut to static so suddenly that Jake thought his heart had stopped. For 30 seconds that felt like 30 years, the radio remained silent except for the hiss of dead air. Then, impossibly, every screen in the command center flickered to life. The image that appeared made Jake's knees buckle. It was a star map, not the crude representations that human astronomers used, but something far more sophisticated. 3-dimensional, interactive, showing the Milky Way galaxy in stunning detail. And there, highlighted in pulsing blue light, was Earth's solar system. But that wasn't the part that made Jake's blood freeze. Hovering directly over Earth's position was a single, terrifying question mark. "They're asking if we're ready," Jake whispered, his hands shaking as the implications crashed over him like a tsunami. "Ready for what?" The question mark pulsed once, twice. Then the screens went dark. But the message was clear. Humanity was being evaluated, and the test had just begun. For months, world leaders had assumed the aliens were waiting for humanity to make the first move. They'd been wrong. The aliens had been waiting for humanity to prove they were ready for the next move. The crystal wasn't just a communication device. It was an examination. A final test to determine whether Earth's dominant species deserved to join the cosmic community. And here's the terrifying part. Humanity didn't even know what the test was measuring. Intelligence? Unity? Courage? The ability to handle the truth? Or something else entirely, something that would determine whether Earth became a partner in the galaxy or a cautionary tale. Jake stared at the blank screens, his mind racing through possibilities. Every decision from this moment forward would echo through human history. The wrong choice could mean extinction. The right choice could mean evolution. But first, they had to figure out what the aliens were actually asking. And time was running out faster than anyone realized. The crystal was still down there, 3 miles beneath the Pacific, pulsing with alien intelligence and waiting for humanity's answer. The question was, did humanity even know what question they were being asked? It's like compound interest. Every moment of delay was adding weight to the eventual reckoning. Speaking of compounding effects, check out our next video about how small decisions create massive consequences over time, because sometimes the future of an entire species hangs on a single choice. The world's most powerful leaders gathered in an abandoned missile silo beneath the Nevada desert, their faces pale with the weight of humanity's greatest secret. The irony wasn't lost on anyone here. They were meeting in a facility designed to launch nuclear destruction, trying to prevent the annihilation of their species. President Michael Harrison looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 5 months. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled from sleepless nights, and his hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the metal table. Around him sat the most influential people on Earth, the Russian premier, the Chinese president, the British prime minister, and a dozen other world leaders who'd flown in under the cover of darkness. 150 days. Harrison's voice exploded through the underground chamber as his fist slammed against the table, making everyone jump. 150 days we've been lying to 7 billion people while alien warships hover over our heads like vultures. The sound echoed off the concrete walls, bouncing back at them like an accusation. Each leader felt the weight of that lie pressing down on their shoulders. They'd told their citizens that the unusual atmospheric disturbances were solar flares. They'd explained away the increased military activity as routine exercises. They'd even staged fake meteor showers to account for the occasional sightings of the alien vessels. But you can't hide the truth forever, especially when it's literally hanging over everyone's heads. They're not warships, Dr. Lisa Thompson interrupted, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. She sat at the far end of the table, looking impossibly small among the world's most powerful people. In her hands, she held the crystalline, a device that had been recovered from the ocean depths, humanity's first piece of alien technology. The crystal pulsed with that familiar blue light, casting eerie shadows across the faces of the assembled leaders. It had been doing that for weeks now, ever since they'd brought it to the surface. But Dr. Thompson had discovered something that changed everything. This device responds to human consciousness, she continued, holding the crystal up so everyone could see its ethereal glow. When multiple people touch it together, the ships change position slightly. They're not here to destroy us. They're studying us. President Harrison's face twisted with frustration. Studying us like lab rats. Ow. Is that supposed to make me feel better about lying to the American people? Studying us for what? General Patricia Walsh demanded, her voice sharp with barely controlled fury. The 4-star general had spent her entire career preparing for threats to national security, but nothing had prepared her for this. What could beings advanced enough to cross interstellar space possibly want to learn from us? Dr. Thompson's next words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock that spread across the room. See if we're unified enough to join them. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the hum of the facilities, air recycling system, the distant rumble of the generators, collective intake of breath from leaders who suddenly understood the true scope of what they were facing. The crystal gets brighter when we work together, dimmer when we argue, Dr. Thompson explained, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been testing it for weeks. When people cooperate, share ideas, make decisions collectively, the light intensifies. When they fight, compete, or act selfishly, it dims. She paused, letting the implications sink in. They're testing human unity, our capacity for cooperation on a global scale. Think about that for a moment. These aliens weren't interested in humanity's weapons, technology, or resources. They were measuring something far more fundamental, the ability of an entire species to work together. And based on the current state of world politics, how do you think humanity was scoring? President Harrison's face went white as the blood drained from his cheeks. And if we fail their test? The crystal pulsed ominously in Dr. Thompson's hands, its blue light flickering like a dying star. I don't think we want to find out. The Russian premier leaned forward, his accent thick with concern. Dr. Thompson, You are saying these aliens judge us based on our ability to cooperate? But look around this room. We can barely agree on trade policies, let alone planetary unity. Exactly, Dr. Thompson nodded grimly, and that might be the problem. For 5 months, we've been focused on hiding their presence instead of addressing what they're actually looking for. We've been treating this as a military threat when it's actually a social examination. The Chinese president spoke up, his voice measured but tense. What happens if we reveal the truth now? After months of deception, will our people trust us to lead them through first contact? It was the question everyone had been avoiding. The elephant in the room that grew larger with each passing day. You tell 7 billion people that their governments have been lying about the most important event in human history. General Walsh stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the concrete floor. This is insane. We're talking about risking global panic, economic collapse, the breakdown of civilization itself. All based on the theory that some crystal wants us to play nice? Not a theory, Dr. Thompson replied firmly. I've run hundreds of tests. The correlation is undeniable. The crystal responds to human emotion, cooperation, and unity. It's like a cosmic mood ring, if you will. Despite the gravity of the situation, a few leaders actually cracked smiles at that comparison. Even in the face of potential extinction, humans found ways to inject humor into the darkest moments. But the smiles faded quickly as the reality of their situation reasserted itself. They were being judged by beings who could travel between stars. And the criteria for passing wasn't military might or technological advancement. It was something far more challenging for humanity to achieve. How much time do we have? The British Prime Minister asked, his voice barely audible. Dr. Thompson looked down at the crystal, which was pulsing faster now, as if sensing the urgency in the room. I don't know. But the pattern is accelerating. The ships are moving into tighter formation, and the crystal's responses are becoming more intense. I think they're running out of patience. President Harrison buried his face in his hands. So we have to choose. Continue the lie and hope they go away, or tell the truth and risk everything on the chance that humanity can unite for the first time in recorded history. The weight of that choice pressed down on every person in the room. They held the fate of their species in their hands. And every option led through a minefield of consequences, just like compound interest. Every day of delay was adding weight to the eventual reckoning. Speaking of compounding effects, check out our next video about how small decisions create massive consequences over time, because sometimes the survival of civilization depends on making the right choice at the right moment. Day 200 arrived, with a message that shattered every government's carefully constructed lie like a sledgehammer through stained glass. Jake Morrison was pouring his morning coffee. His hands had finally stopped shaking after months of sleepless nights. Every electronic device in the NORAC facility simultaneously came to life. Not just the military equipment, but everything. Coffee machines, digital clocks, even the ancient radio in the break room that nobody had used since the Clinton administration at exactly noon GMT. Every television, radio, and digital screen on Earth displayed the same terrifying message in perfect, unaccented English. People of Earth, we have waited long enough. Your leaders know of our presence. In 24 hours, we will reveal ourselves to all. Prepare your people, or we will do it for you. The coffee mug slipped from Jake's fingers, hitting the floor in slow motion as the implications crashed over him like a tsunami. After 200 days of silence, the aliens had just blown humanity's biggest secret wide open. And they'd given world leaders exactly 24 hours to clean up the mess they'd created. Within minutes, Jake's secure phone was screaming with calls from every capital on Earth. The Nevada bunker that abandoned missile silo, where the world's most powerful people had been meeting in secret, became a madhouse of panic and recrimination. We're dead. The British Prime Minister's voice cracked through the emergency video conference, his usually composed demeanor shattered beyond repair. When people find out we've been hiding this for 7 months, they'll tear us apart with their bare hands. President. Harrison's face was ghost white on the screen, his hands trembling as he gripped his desk. They'll tear apart everything, economy, governments, society itself. We're talking about the collapse of civilization. The Russian premier was shouting in rapid-fire Russian, his translator struggling to keep up. The Chinese president sat in stunned silence, his face a mask of barely controlled terror. The German chancellor was openly weeping. These were the most powerful people on Earth, and they looked like children who'd been caught stealing cookies except. The cookies were the truth about humanity's place in the universe. But here's the thing about rock bottom: it gives you a solid foundation to build from. Jake Morrison stood up in the NORAD command center, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade through silk. Then we tell them the truth. All of it. But we hid this because we were terrified of how humanity would react to learning. We're not alone. The video conference fell silent. You could hear the hum of electronics, the whisper of air conditioning, the collective intake of breath from leaders who suddenly realized they had one chance to get this right. The truth about our cowardice? General Walsh spat, her voice dripping with disgust. About how we've been lying to our own people for 7 months while alien ships hung over their heads. Dr. Thompson, still clutching the crystal that had started, this whole revelation looked up with eyes that blazed with sudden understanding. No, she said quietly, her voice carrying more authority than any of the world leaders on screen. The truth about our potential. The crystal in her hands erupted with blue light, brighter than it had ever been. It pulsed with the rhythm of a heartbeat, casting dancing shadows across the walls of the command center. For the first time in months, the alien device seemed ... excited. They didn't come here to conquer us, Dr. Thompson continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. They came to see if we were ready to evolve, to join something bigger than ourselves, something that spans stars and galaxies and civilizations we can't even imagine. Think about that for a moment. What if first contact wasn't about invasion or domination? What if it was about graduation, about proving that humanity had grown beyond its primitive need for secrets and lies? Jake felt something shift inside him, a weight he'd been carrying for 200 days suddenly becoming lighter. The crystal responds to unity, right? To cooperation and truth? Dr. Thompson nodded, the device blazing even brighter in her hands. It's been trying to tell us all along. Every time we worked together, every time we shared information honestly, it got brighter. Every time we argued or kept secrets, it dimmed. President Harrison's voice came through the speakers, barely above a whisper. So what are you saying? That we've been failing their test this entire time? Not failing, Jake corrected, a smile creeping across his face for the first time in months. Learning. They gave us 200 days to figure out what they were really asking for. And now we have 24 hours to prove we understand. The 24-hour countdown had begun, and suddenly, it didn't feel like a death sentence. It felt like the final exam. That would determine whether humanity was ready to join the cosmic community or remain isolated on a single blue planet. As world leaders scrambled to craft a unified response, Jake realized this was humanity's moment of truth. Not the moment when they'd be judged by alien overlords, but the moment when they'd choose who they wanted to be as a species. The crystal pulsed one last time, and somewhere in the darkness of space, 17 ships waited for humanity's answer. They'd been patient teachers, waiting for their students to understand the lesson. Now, it was time for the final test. Tomorrow, the silence would end. The question was whether humanity would speak with one voice unified, honest and ready to take their place among the stars, or burn in the chaos of 7 billion. Individual screams of fear and confusion. The choice was theirs. The time had come. And for the first time in 200 days, Jake Morrison believed humanity might just pass the test. Because sometimes, the greatest transformations happen not when we're forced to change, but when we choose to evolve. Just like compound interest. Every moment of unity was building towards something exponentially greater than the sum of its parts. Speaking of compounding effects, check out our next video about how small decisions create massive consequences over time, because sometimes the future of an entire species hangs on choosing cooperation over competition. The end.